Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Fuse Show. I'm joined today by my guest, Rich Kahn. Rich is the co-founder and CEO of Anora. He has 28 years of digital marketing experience, and he's been recognized as one of the most notable security experts in the digital marketing space. He's also an Ernst Young Entrepreneur of the Year award recipient for technology. He's a private pilot, martial artist, and has been married for 27 years with 4 children. Hey, Rich, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's start with something important, and then we'll go into the business side. But I mean, 27 years, like that is a legit commitment. So tell me more. Like what is the success? What has led to your success there?
Actually, it goes back further than that. We were high school sweethearts. We started dating when we were 15 and never stopped. So it's one of those things. I think, when you have high school sweethearts, you either grow together or you grow apart, and we happen to grow together. So we launched businesses together. We've had 4 kids, a number of houses. So we do a lot together. So in my opinion, it really stresses the relationship. There's times where obviously we have arguments about business or about whatever, and you either learn to work through it or you learn to separate. And we work through it. It's been great.
That's even more notable that you guys work together. You were telling me offline that you commute together to the office. You guys work side by side, and it sounds like you have for a lot of years.
Yeah, I've been in the marketing space since '93, the digital marketing space. I've been doing all kinds of stuff, more on the tech side. And then she joined me in 2003 as we started up a company together. So we've been working together since 2003.
I'm celebrating 16 years with my wife this month.
Awesome.
We have 5 kids total, two of which are grown. But one of the things I think has been helpful to us is we have pretty clearly defined roles. Obviously, there's overlap and it's not perfect, but generally we have pretty clearly defined roles. Do you handle things that way with your wife? Like, how do you decide who's going to do what and kind of how that plays out longer term?
In business or personal?
Both. Hit me with both.
In business, it's pretty clear defined. The one who has all the knowledge on the product. I was one of the original developers, so I stay more on the tech side, and also have a sales background, so I focus on the sales and product. She's typically handled finance, and due to a need, she's actually migrated into marketing. I help out with the marketing, but I really try to let her run that because between product and sales, I'm kind of busy, and she's grown into the position nice. So we have some clear-cut the rules here on like what we're each responsible for. You have to have division of labor in business, whether it's a spouse or just another partner. You need to know who's responsible for what so you can hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
At home, for the most part, it's pretty much we do things together. We've been together for so long, and we're together pretty much all the time. So for the most part, we always do things together. It's not like you're responsible for this, I'm responsible for that. Go shopping, we go shopping together. Pick out what we're going to eat that week. It's everything we do it together. It's just, we got married, we want to be together, and that's,
and so
we enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have other business partners within the business, or is it just you and your wife that are the owners?
Over the years, I've had different business partners throughout. But at this point, no, it's just, for this business, just the 2 of us.
What would you recommend to founders who are considering having a business partner, whether that's their spouse or somebody else, versus going at it alone?
One of my big rules that I've learned, unfortunately, the hard way over the years is having, taking a really good friend and bringing them into a business. Because when it comes time, if they're working for you, if they're not a partner, if they're working for you, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to be the boss when you have to be the boss, because then the friend card comes out. So if it's a business partner, I've had partners that were really, really close friends of mine, and we became partners in businesses, and it worked out great for a number of years, until it didn't. But at the end of the day, it's tough because if you're going to bring on a friend or a spouse, the capacity of a partner would be my recommendation. It's also, like I said, when you're doing a business, it's hard. There's so many moving parts to do it yourself. Like, you should be able to do every aspect of the business. And there's not a single part of the business I can't do. From developing the application to selling the product to marketing, all that stuff, I can do it all. But you can't do it all effectively. You spread yourself too thin, you become efficient at doing everything. So you really need to, find where you fit best, where your best skill sets lie, do that, and then find people, be it a partner if you needed to bring in a partner, or other people that you can count on to get that job done. So could you be a sole entrepreneur? Sure. If you can find and hire the right people, which is probably out of any business owner that I've talked to, is the number one hardest part of our job. Mm-hmm. Finding the right talent, hiring, firing, all that stuff is just in the realm of probably the hardest part of running a business, because when you find the right people, it's awesome because they're getting the work done, they're doing the job, they're doing it better than you would do it because maybe their skill sets are better in that area. You want to find people with more talent than you to grow the business, and you can more or less direct it. But when you find the wrong people, and then you got to do the firing, and it's always hard to fire. We just had to let somebody go this week, and it's like, man, such a good guy, trying hard, but at the end of the day, it's just not bringing in deals. If you're a salesperson who can't sell a client, how long can you afford to keep somebody like that? So you look at things like that, and it's tough because they're good people. You didn't hire them if they weren't good people. You hire them because they're good people, and they have backgrounds of families. You get to know who the spouses are and all that stuff. So when it comes time to let people go, it's tough, and that's unfortunate part of the business. But if you can find the right person, over the years, I've always had a partner. I'm just trying to think back, except for probably one of the first couple businesses when I was just kind of initially tinkering and it just kind of blew up into a business. It's a lot more enjoyable to have a partner because you have your direction that you want to go in. And then all of a sudden, because you have your blinders on as you're trying to go down that direction, all of a sudden they see something from the outside. It's invaluable, you know? And if they can bring some money to the table, it doesn't hurt.
That's always nice. You can bring your money too. I'm thinking about the corollaries between marriage and business partnership. I'm married, as I mentioned, and then I also have a business partner as well, and we're 50-50 partners. And I see a lot of corollaries, but one thing that's different, at least, and I recognize not everybody believes this, but I believe marriage is lifelong, or that should certainly be the intent. And the expectation is that we're going to just figure it out. Like when there's trouble, and there will be, we'll figure it out, and we're committed to each other for the lifetime. I don't necessarily see business partnership in that way, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on kind of setting expectations. And we're also at different seasons of our life, that's fair to say. Like, so do you have those initial conversations and sort of set a tone, like, hey, let's make a commitment for X amount of years or time to allow compounding to take effect, or how do you handle that sort of long-term planning in that relationship?
Because I entered a relationship at 15 with my wife, and once we got to that certain stage where we knew this was going to be long-term, you go into it thinking this is lifetime. Like, obviously, when you're dating and stuff like that, you're never thinking past the first date, you're only thinking about what's going on right then and there. But once you get to that point in your mind where, okay, I really love this person, this is who I want to be with, you go into it for life. Things happen, and I get it, I don't judge, but you go into it for life. Same with a partnership for me. Okay. When I decide I'm going to be in partnership with somebody, and I'm going to bring them in a partner, or they're bringing me in a partner, I'm going to be whichever direction it's going. I don't go into it with a timeline. I go into it like, we're doing this business, and if the business ends, that ends the relation. That typically would end that partnership. Mm-hmm. In my case, that didn't. We had several businesses together. We grew. They were successful until the model wasn't successful. Then we started another one. It was success. I went into the relationship with the intent in mind of, this is going to be, I don't want to say for life, but for the length of the business. Yeah. And you don't know where it's going to take you. You could jump in like one of the first business we got involved, the two of us. 3 months later, we had a $60 million deal on the table. We're 28 years old. We had $60 million for a 3-month-old company back in 2000. It was supposed to close right after the dot-com bubble burst, but when that dot-com bubble burst, we lost the deal. So here I am still working, right? But, or it could be one of those where it takes decades before you get to a point where there's an exit strategy of some sort. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to go into a relationship not with a timeline in mind. You're not an investor. Like, an investor has a timeline. They come in, I love your business. Here's a couple $1 million. I want out in 3 years or 5 years. They come in with a timeline. You should not come into a partnership with a timeline. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I see over and over again, people that are, appear to be an overnight success really have just kept at it for a very, very long time. And I saw on Twitter, so I wish I could attribute this properly, but someone said, key to being successful in business, number one, start a business. Number two, don't stop. It's like, and I know that's not always true. I know there's, exceptions to that, but I feel like there's so many cases where founders just give up too soon, and I guess to that point, it would make more sense for the founders to delineate those expectations like, hey, I'm in this for the long term. Are you also, or how does that look?
Yeah, see, when you're looking at that, that's a different scenario, right? I agree. Like you start a business, you don't stop, but there comes a time when you have to stop investing and putting whether it's time, money, whatever resources. You have to be realistic. You almost have to step outside the business, look at the business, look at trajectories, look at what's going on in the marketplace, and decide, hey, am I in the right business? If you're running into issues, if it's growing, don't stop, right? Just keep growing it, and then figure out your next game plan. But if you're at a point where you're kind of stagnant, you're starting to decline, and you're trying to figure out, do we stay, do we go? You got to look at everything, and you can't do it in your shoes. You got to step outside the business and look inside as as almost a fresh perspective, and look at the pros and cons, and kind of weigh it out and decide which direction should we go in. But there comes a time. It's almost like, I hate to say it, it's almost, running a business is a lot like gambling. Like you can't keep chasing what may not ever come. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing and still expecting a different result.
Yeah.
It's the same situation with the business. If you're not going to change anything, you're just going to keep doing it and hoping things turn around. You might be at that point where it's time to stop. Mm-hmm. But if you're like, no, wait, I stepped out. I see where the business is going. I see where the industry is headed. If I can make these changes successfully, and you build goals for yourself to hit those and accomplish those, then that's a situation where, don't stop the business. Just keep going. But there's a lot of times that I have, just from being thick-headed, just keep going and not looking around at everybody else or where the market was going, and drove businesses into success because I just wasn't paying attention to outside factors. Happens all the time,
I think what you're saying more or less is that world-class judgment is required to make that decision. Because I see on the one hand, there's this funny meme that this guy is like, digging through, tunneling, and he's almost to the diamonds, and he's just shy of it, and he quits and turns around and goes home. It's like there's that idea. It's like, no, you're so close, just push through. And then there's the opposite, where it's like the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like you've invested so much time, et cetera. Like you just want to keep going, but it doesn't make sense to. Like, how then do you apply that judgment, especially for younger entrepreneurs, to make that decision? Because that's a tough call.
Usually, a great way to do that is if you have a partner, having a sit down, open, honest discussion, not pie in the sky discussion. Have an honest discussion. If you don't have a partner, or even if you do have a partner, potentially getting an outside opinion. And it doesn't have to be somebody who's expert in business. It could just be somebody who hears out your story of what you're doing and just gives you an outside perspective. Yeah. Not that you have to take their advice, but sometimes hearing it from somebody from the outside makes it a little more real. Because the entrepreneur is the dreamer. We believe it's going to go this direction. We believe nothing's going to stop us. We believe we're unstoppable, but we're not always right. Many of us have proven that, whereas 80% of businesses fail in the first year. So you have to know your stopping point, and sometimes getting that outside perspective makes a huge difference. And I think the book you were referring to is Acres of Diamonds, where he talks about 6 inches away from the mother lode of diamonds and all that stuff. Yeah. And that happens too. So how far do you dig? It's like in gambling. How far do you go into debt to try to keep, try to win it back? And you gotta know your end point.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear your take on the role of the founder as the company grows. In other words, like, maybe a founder is a good fit from 0 to a million in ARR, whatever the number is, it's not important. But then that next level it's a whole different business at that point. Mm-hmm. Now, are you of the opinion that you can constantly upskill as a founder to where you can achieve those higher level roles as the company grows? Or are you more so a fan of hiring a CEO with that level of experience to take the business to the next level?
Yeah. It depends on the individual. I mean, there's obviously lots of successful entrepreneurs that started off as a founder, Steve Jobs, and still be able to run a company, Elon Musk, there's plenty of examples out in the marketplace. that of people who started small and become, pie in the sky rich, top 10 people in the world, stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of people who, I have a lot of colleagues that I have that started as founders of the company. Next thing you know, they're publicly traded. They're still running the company, and they're a great fit for that. And then there's a lot of people that they're good at certain aspects of the company, but probably not the ideal person to run the company once it gets beyond a certain point. Maybe you're merging with another company. Maybe you're getting infused with a lot of cash, and the first thing they want to do is replace you as the head of the company with somebody else. I was talking to somebody on another podcast. They were asking me something about, what happens when, an investor walks in, gives you a boatload of money, but wants to replace you as the CEO of the company. And I said, if they're willing to invest tens of millions of dollars and they think putting a CEO is going to do better for their investment as well as my own, I'd be crazy not to. Let me just find a spot in the company where I fit best. Yeah. So basically you want to invest in my company and reduce my responsibilities? That's a no-brainer.
But I get your point, but that requires a degree of humility that not everybody has. What has been your experience with that topic? The evolution of your own humility, because that's what you're saying makes complete sense, but it requires a humble heart, I think, to be able to accept that.
Especially when you start something from an idea, grow it to where it's making tens of millions millions a year, whatever the number is, right? And then all of a sudden, someone comes along and says, you're not good enough to run this company anymore. I'm going to replace you, is really what they're saying.
Yeah, right.
And either in your mind as an entrepreneur, you know that. And it's like, for me, for example, I don't know, this is the fourth or fifth multi-million-dollar web property I started out bootstrapping with, no outside funding, just straight, investing on my own. And as the company grows, especially this company, I'm seeing different phases. If we were to down the road, let's say, merge with another company, I would be happy to step aside because there's certain things that I'm missing the boat on certain things. I know my skill set, starting a company from an idea and bringing in millions of dollars. And that's my expertise, but I've never gone beyond that. Could I do it if I wanted to, if I trained myself for it? Yeah, sure. I could do it. Entrepreneurs can do pretty much whatever they need to do. Are you the right fit at the right time? Mm-hmm. At that point, that's what you have to decide. And then, like anything else, you have to look at what's overall better for the company. Yeah. Are you the best fit for that company? Or when you start interviewing some of these other people that they're looking to replace you with, are they better for the company, running the company, and then you focusing on a task that you fit better than anybody else for? Mm-hmm. So it's again, I guess it depends on the individual themselves, their phase of life, because it all depends on what your goals are at that point in your life. Yeah. It also depends on your skill set, and it also depends on who's asking you to step down. If you're merging with another company, if you're being the one acquired, guess what? You're going to lose that position. So you have to be, if you're going into that, you have to understand that's not going to be, if their company's coming to buy you, their CEO is going to remain CEO. So you definitely know you're stepping down. But if you have another company going to put in money, depending on how much they're putting in and depending on what they're asking for and depending on what you get to keep and maintain, that you got to weigh those judgments.
Yeah. How old were you when you started your entrepreneurial journey?
Probably the earliest I can remember is about 11.
Okay.
With my lawn mowing business, I had like 6 or 7 lawns. I think a lot of us did that, especially if you live in the suburbs. If you live in the city, obviously probably not an option, but probably started that. I was selling door-to-door mason shoes. I did, newspaper routes. I did all kinds of stuff. I wrote my first game when I was 9. So programming-wise, it's about as early as you can get. But yeah, entrepreneur-wise, I think 11 rings a bell. Probably when I started my first lawn cutting business.
Okay, so this is a tough question. You can take it where you want, but I'm wanting to extract out how you've changed, what you've learned during that journey, and you can take it from early adulthood to now. I'm wanting to know how you're different as an entrepreneur and how you've evolved from then to now.
A lot. Let's start with, I started my first online e-newsletter, back then e-magazine, what they used to call them, in 93 because there was no graphical internet. The internet was turned over to the public in, I think it was September 1st of 1991. 93, I got online. I was hooked. As soon as I saw that a computer can connect to another computer at any given point in time. I was actually, in high school, I wrote a bulletin board system, which was the early predecessor to a website. And those were hosted all on ARPANET. So ARPANET was all a string of modems. If you wanted to connect to a computer, you had to dial that computer's line and connect to it. So I saw all that. But when I saw that a computer can instantly connect around the globe to any other computer that was connected to this network, I was like, I'm hooked. So I'm not much of a writer. My wife will tell you that many, many times. Even though I'm a writer for Forbes magazine, I write articles from time to time. I don't consider myself a writer. I have a lot of information. I don't portray it well in writing. Anyway, so I was writing a newsletter, and I was just telling people what's going on with the internet because it was like there was no resource for it. So I figured I'm just going to create one. I kind of trolled in the AOL chat rooms at the time, collected a bunch of users. At one point, I was up to like 20,000 subscribers to this newsletter back in the early 90s. And somebody said, hey, can I advertise in your magazine? I'm like, sure. So we came up with a pricing model. Next thing you know, I'm making a couple thousand a week, sitting in my bedroom writing an article and sending it out to 20,000 people. And it was great. But I didn't think too much of it, of being an entrepreneur at that point. I then progressed that into buying 300 phone lines, putting it into my house, and starting up an ISP. And at that point, we were the fastest ISP on the East Coast for probably a good 6 months because we happened to pick the right technology that was going to lead the 56K modem technologies at the time. And I struggled. It was just a struggle because trying to drive a 1995 subscriber when you're competing against all these big boys with lots of money in marketing, it was tough.
Yeah.
But then we started this company in late 99. 3 months later, I had a $60 million deal on the table. I'm 28. So you're 28 years old. You're thinking, I hit mother load. How easy was that? It was only a 3-month run. It took us, maybe 4 or 5 months to put the whole thing together. Like, that changes your mindset a lot because it just came way too fast and way too easy, which I guess I wished it would have gone through, but I guess from a morality standpoint, I'm glad it didn't.
I see.
I think I can say that today.
You weren't prepared for that at the time, huh?
No, 20 years later, I could probably say that. But I remember at the time thinking, not a big deal. We're making so much money right now every single month. Who cares? I didn't care about the deal because we're just going to keep running this. But, and things always, they're good until they're not, So that first business that was doing unbelievably well that eventually tanked over the next 12 months after that deal came off the table really sets your mind standard because you start spending money a certain way. You get used to spending money a certain way. And the last thing you want to do is stop spending money a certain way.
Sure.
And people I always found will do more to avoid losing something than to gain something new. And I use this whenever I was selling. I always had the proverbial gun to my head, like you need to pick up the phone and make that next call, or you will not, you won't live. And it was almost like that's the way my mindset was like. However, if someone said you pick up that phone and you can drive a fancier car in a couple months, that wasn't motivating. But you always had to find that motivation, and it was kind of just the way that was set up. So once that first company kind of fell, it's like, okay, a dose of reality hits you and like, all right, maybe it's not as easy as I thought to make the money. Let's try something else. And we struggled with a couple other businesses. The next business came up, $35 million deal on the table. It was awesome. There was 4 partners. 2 partners were brothers. They fought about everything to the point it scared away the buyers. And once the buyers went away, shortly behind that was the bankers. And then eventually me and one of the partners split off and started up another company. And you start to realize, sometimes you get lucky and everything you do goes right and things just take off like crazy. And other times you just struggle and muscle through it and still get success. I mean, I stand back and, I can't complain where I am today. It'd be nice to be further ahead because of all the stuff that I've done and all the stuff I've done as early as I've done it. But you kind of grow up through that and things change and all those different things that will change your mindset. Like, look at Elon Musk, right? Almost everything that we see turned to gold for him, and it just took off. I guarantee he's got a boatload of stories of failures in his life.
I'm sure.
And I'm sure they're out there. I haven't read them. Yeah. But, it looks like he's almost an overnight success. It looks like, but he started PayPal, so I'm pretty sure that was the story. I think he started PayPal.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I'm sure that wasn't an overnight success. I remember a story when PayPal first got started, how they got scammed. And I'm sure that took a big bite out of their budgets. So, like I said, for every successful person, there's dozens and dozens of failure stories behind it that got them to that helped them get to that level. That if they didn't go through those failures, they wouldn't make it there. And through each success and through each failure, I think the individual changes.
So do I hear you saying that resilience has been a key then?
For me, yes. Finding something and just holding on to it and just writing it as hard and finding out what it takes. I mean, there's times that I've had marketing firms over the years as well. There's times when, I'd go a year without taking salary, just live off of my 401k, because that's what you got to do. You're the last one to get paid in the business. When you own the business, payroll is number one. You got to make sure everyone's getting paid. You're taking care of your customers, taking care of anybody that's supplying. All that stuff has got to get taken care of. You're the last one to get paid. So when there's leftover money, hey, maybe you're going to, it's feast or famine. You're either getting paid well or you're not. So, like I said, it's the resilience that I think makes a huge, like if you pick out a good game plan and you follow your game plan, resilience makes sense. If you're just going out wild, just pushing hard just to push hard, doesn't make sense. You have to have a plan before you start pushing. But yes, once you have the game plan, resilience is I think a huge part of it.
What's the mindset that has allowed you to bounce back from these failures? Because that's dejecting, and that's hard to stomach when that happens, when you have these expectations that were just not met.
I've been fortunate enough that I've been able to muscle through, and I always say muscle through because it always seems to be like a grind. It's very rare that all of a sudden you do something and everything just takes off like a bat out of the hell. Yeah. It's always something that you just keep pushing, and it's like, in my mind, it was just nose down to the grindstone and just get it done and not pay attention to everything around me. So that's kind of where, I guess where that resilience comes in, because every time I've done that, it's worked out. A lot of hard work, a lot of sacrifice, but it's worked out. And it's worked out because I hate to say muscle through it again, but that's kind of how I felt. I was just pushing through to get to the next phase of that business.
Do you typically do a post-mortem, when failure strikes, and try to learn from that? I mean, I guess that seems like an obvious question, but is that part of the evolution, is making sure you extract the lessons from that failure?
Sad to say no,
Okay.
because you live through it.
Yeah.
And every day you're like, I should have done this. I should have done so when you get past it, you've already played that in your mind 1,000 times. There's no sense. The last thing you want to do is go back and replay that in your head. You just want to focus on the next thing and put all your energy moving forward. So for me, I've never gone back and said, well, now what have I learned from all that? I've banged my head against the wall enough times throughout that process, because when a failure happens, it doesn't happen today.
Of course.
It happens over a long period of time that feels like it's even longer. So if it was a 6-month window of, hey, I see it starting to nosedive, and you're working hard to try to save it, and eventually you have to say, okay, it's time to call it quits. That's a long period of time, and you're living it day by day. So those days seem extremely long, stressful. The last thing you want to do is replay that whole 6 months in your mind. It's just the last thing I ever wanted to do.
Yeah,
but you learn from it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, on a micro level, on the level of the day, how frequently do you feel accomplished at the end of your day, where you feel like you can go home pleased at the level of effort that you put out or the results from the day? How frequently do you kind of hit that feeling?
Rarely. Most of us that are building businesses, that are working hard, that are in the growth phase and really trying to build always feel like you can do more. So it's like, the end of the day, you might have accomplished a lot. You may have put on a couple new clients. You may have solved a few problems. You may have done a lot of stuff that you should be happy with, that literally could satisfy you for over a week. And yet you go home like, I could put another hour in. I could do a little more. You're never satisfied. That's actually one of our core values here at the company is never satisfied. There's always a better way to do it. It's never done. The job is never done.
How do you balance? I think I understand what you're saying, but how do you balance that with your personal life? And what I'm getting at is, one of the things that I've struggled with a lot in the past, and I'm finally making some headway on this, but I'm not quite there, is trying to do my best to leave work at work so I can be present at home with my kids and in the moment. And I know it's impossible to do that perfectly, but I'm trying to get to that place where I can really be present and not be thinking about work or this thing I got to do or I should have done or whatever. So
there's the ideal way for many years, what I used to do, because I have 4 kids, obviously, they're at the age 21 to 26 now, so they're pretty much out of the house and grown. But when they were younger, for me, the break point was they were always involved in some type of sport throughout the year. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not a big sports fan as to say, hey, let me watch, professional sports. I watch them from time to time. I don't get involved in it. Like, I don't know the stats and figures like a lot of guys do, but it's just not me. I used to get heavily involved in the kids' sports. I used to do some coaching on some of them when I was able to. But we were there for every single sporting game that they had. And that was kind of an outlet for me. So it was kind of like when I left the office, that was kind of that break point. Of course, I can always jump on the phone, answer an email, check on something here or there. But you always kind of struggle with, okay, you want to give 110% to whatever you're doing. If you're at business, 110%. When you're at home, 110%. Yeah, right. And when you run a business, it's tough because, an email comes in or something comes in that's important that you, in your mind, if you jump on it now, I have a better shot at closing this deal or solving this problem or whatever. And once you know about it, you're never going to go to sleep until you actually address it. Otherwise, you're going to be thinking about the way to solve it, the way to handle it, what you're going to do tomorrow, instead of just getting it off your plate so you can rest at night. So, yeah, a lot of that homework life for us has always been, we have a physical office that we go to for work, and then obviously when we go home. But for me, it was the kids' sports were great because that was an opportunity for me to completely forget about work and focus on the kids. Mm-hmm. As they started getting older, my wife kept on telling me, you need to get a hobby. Like you go to the office, you work, you come home, the kids are pretty much, they're at that age where they're in the cars and they're driving to their friend's house, or you're home by yourself, and what do? You jump back on your laptop, you start working again. You need a hobby. So ultimately ended up started flying. And I got my pilot's license, and that's how that became part of my hobby. So now, it might be the end of the day, and we're about a 2.5 hour ride from Atlantic City, but by my plane, it's only a half hour. So we'll finish up work. It's like, hey, the weather looks good. Let's go to Atlantic City, do a little gambling, get some food over there, and we'll just jump in the plane and go. And you got to find those outlets that take your mind off of work, that's separate. You just can't sit at home and try to, you have to do something, whether it's playing with the kids in the pool or, doing a project at home or flying or whatever your hobby might be, martial arts, anything that you find interesting. You got to find something that takes your mind off of work. Otherwise, you're going to think about work.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
When I think about the principle of compounding and gaining the value from compounding, it requires playing the long game. And when I think about playing the long game, for me, those are the types of things that are important to find that balance. Like I've in previous businesses worked way too many hours, and I just was obsessed with the business, and I let other things go. And it's weird because my wife is very, very supportive, but in the past, I behaved in such a way that caused her to resent the business. And that was bad. Oh, that was bad. It's like I'm determined now. And I recognize that I only have control over part of that. But I'm determined now with our current business, like I am going to do everything I can to prevent my wife from resenting this business because I want her to have buy-in. I want her to be excited about this as well. And in a weird sense, it's almost like I was cheating on her with the business. And it's like, that's just not healthy,
Yeah, because, and I guess everybody will fully understand that because, like I said, it's not that you're cheating, but your attention is on the businesses instead of her, when it should be on her at that time.
Right.
And so what I did was I brought my wife into the business.
Yeah, well, there.
No, that wasn't the reason for it. But I mean, at that point now, we share in the frustrations of the business and the successes of the business together.
I see.
Because when we go home, it's not like, okay, what'd you do today? How was your day at work?
Yeah.
We know about it because we're constantly communication all day long about it. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's you got to find that. I personally think you have to find things that take your mind off the business so that you can focus on the business. And one thing my wife does that's really well, we get these books, just a journal, mm-hmm. Put down a list of all the stuff you want to get accomplished that day or over the next couple of days and start checking things off. And as you check things off, you feel like you've accomplished something.
Yeah.
And then this way, if it's written on the paper, it's not in your mind because it's on the paper. You're not going to forget it because if you don't write it down, you're constantly trying to remember, okay, let me not forget this. And then, of course, a week later, oh, shoot, I forgot about it. But if you write it down and commit it to paper, you don't have to leave it in your head. And you don't have to think about it. You can go home and focus on home life.
Yeah, that's a great point. How do you go about setting expectations? And this can apply to the business or personal life. Some people refer to it as goals. I have a bit of a hang up on setting goals that I don't necessarily have control over the outcome. And maybe one example, and I'm curious to hear your feedback if it's similar or different, but setting a revenue number. It's like we have a goal of hitting this revenue number or having this number of employees or whatever by this time. And there's an element of that we have control over, but there's also a lot that we don't. So I'm curious how you navigate that in terms of setting goals, setting expectations.
We just started actually recently employed a management system in the company called EOS. Not sure if you've heard of it.
Yeah. Give us I have heard of it, but for those that haven't, give us a TLDR of that.
Yeah, they call it an entrepreneur's operating system, and they basically give you a set of simple tools to help you manage and grow and predict the company's growth and stuff like that. So we have a consultant that comes in. They do the training, initial couple of days of training, and then it's quarterly to set your quarterly goals and everything else. And granted, like one of the numbers that we set is the goal is to hit this much money in revenue. But while you don't have full control over hitting that revenue, there's a lot of other tasks under that you do have control over. So it's like you don't worry about the stuff you can't control. You know, whatever you can't control, but put a list together of things you can control. And now hold yourself accountable to them. And again, if you hit them, great. If you don't, all right, what are you going to do differently this next quarter to hit the goals? And that's kind of, I think, having that list of sub-goals behind that so you know what you are responsible. So you can't just turn around and say, well, I'm not fully responsible for it, so it's okay, we missed it. Mm-hmm. As an entrepreneur, that doesn't fly. Yeah. You're responsible for certain parts of it. What parts are you responsible for? And take ownership of those. You have to have somebody own every aspect of what makes up that goal. So maybe it's we're going to have 10 salespeople by the end of the next quarter. Well, if you're not the sales manager, who is? Hold them accountable for that. And if they didn't hit that goal, why didn't they hit their goal? Mm-hmm. Did they have the budget? That's your responsibility. Did they have the resources they needed to do recruiting? Did they have the time? Like, there's a bunch of sub goals that you can take responsibility for, and as entrepreneurs, we have to take ownership of each and every one of them that we control. The ones that we can't control, and again, like, you can't control how many clients are going to turn around and sign up in your service. Right. There's no control over that. But if you know you have a 20% closing ratio or a 10% closing ratio, and you do the math, you know how many times you can pick up the phone, how many dollars in advertising you have to, there's some number that will get you ultimately that goal. So if you hit all those goals and you did a responsibility, but say the closing ratio wasn't that good, whose responsibility is that? Is it yours or is it the sales manager? So when you break up a goal like we're going to hit X number of dollars this quarter or whatever, that you may not have full control over, but you do have full control over a lot of stuff under that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. At what size does it make sense to implement a framework like EOS?
I mean, you can do it the startup version, which is literally just get the book. I think the book's called Traction or something like that. But they've got a bunch of resources online that are free to get you up and running. They'll describe how to use their tools. So now that this is the first business in almost 30 years that I've deployed it on, wish I had this sooner. To implement that inside the company, there's a cost, obviously. So you look at the cost and weigh the pros and cons of it. I know companies that are just startups that used it in a past company, could not afford to have what they call an implementer, somebody that comes in and teaches the process and runs the process for you. So they said they just got the book, read the book, made sure everybody on the team read the book, and then just started working through it themselves. Mm-hmm. It's not something you do overnight. It's something that you learn over a period of time. So they all got on a game plan to do it. So the book cost $15, $10, whatever it might cost. Yeah. So it's cheap enough that any business can deploy it. If you're building a business and you have goals and you have things that you have to accomplish, which I think describes every business out there, yeah, then I would suggest get started with it sooner than later. And if you can get a third party, the implementer, to come in and work with you, it's always good to have that outside opinion, mm-hmm, because these people are running around talking to lots of different businesses and seeing what their issues they're going through. And it's nice to have that outside opinion when you can afford it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there a certain company size you would recommend in terms of number of staff to make more sense to hire an implementer?
I think they say minimum staffs are probably like 5 to 10 people, somewhere in there. If you're somewhere between 5 to 10 people, otherwise the tools still work if it's a single individual organization. But there's no delegation. Everything's on your plate. So it's what's the difference of having a list of to-dos and goals to try to hit? So I would say if as long as you have and I would say probably it's more of a leadership team versus just employees, because if you have a BDR who's just banging the phone a couple hundred times a day, they're not going to be part of your EOS planning. They have a goal, 300 calls a day. Yeah. This is what you're trying to accomplish. Simple enough that you don't need that. But when you have, I would say 3 to 4 people, 5 people in management, that's where it makes more sense to have that full-on implementation of the EOS system.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see, we have 6 or 7 in management now, and roughly 30 employees. So I'm very familiar with the concept of EOS, and I've been very tempted to hire an implementer and help us with that, because I just feel like we're missing out on possible opportunities where there's so much going on that I feel like that we're not hitting those big milestones where we have those, they call them rocks, right? Like the bigger things you're focusing on. I feel like that we're kind of focused right here, just implementing our processes, et cetera, and aren't necessarily looking up as much as we should be.
They help you with that. And that's one of those things. So those rocks, as you call them, are the big quarterly goals. Like, okay, each person on the team commits to handling, you put all the rocks on the board of what the company should, if the company could just land another 50 clients, or if the company could just this would be earth changing for the company.
Sure.
Let's put them on the board. And then, are they reasonable? Are they smart goals? Are they attainable? All that good stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you say, yeah, they are. To say, okay, now who's going to take responsibility for that goal? Who's got the ability and the desire and can commit to hitting that goal? Yeah. And then everybody goes around, they pick up the rocks. Now, it's not the whole team working on those individuals. You own it. So now you're fully responsible for hitting that. So now you're going to make sub to-dos and tasks behind it to say, okay, what do I have to do to hit this goal? This is my goal. I have to hit it. My team is counting on me hitting these 3 or 4 rocks. What do I got to do to hit this?
Yeah.
And there's sometimes I'm not hitting mine this quarter. I hit it all except for one. I got one that I just, we're still trying to figure it out as a company. It's almost a company rock, but I took responsibility as a CEO for it, and we're not going to hit it. And I'm doing everything I can to try. It's killing me to try to figure out. I hate not succeeding, hate not finishing, sure. Especially the team is counting on me hitting it, and I'm going to fall short on that role. So how do I fix that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But a size organization like yours, perfect time to implement for sure. If you got 7 people on management, you got 30-something people in the company, it's a great time to start rolling it out, so that, because you start off with the team and then eventually roll it out to all the divisions of the company, and then everybody's kind of accountable in the same situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Rich, we need to land this plane, pun intended. I think the time is here. I want to ask you one more question. This is along the lines of what we talked about, but if you could distill down advice for 25-year-old Rich, what would you tell yourself if you could flash back and advise yourself?
Oh man, there'd be so many things. Buy Bitcoin. Yeah, and I'm lucky I got in there early. But
Good.
But okay, so as much as I am tempted, don't hire friends.
Okay. Because
the friendship is more valuable than the work-life relationship, and that's just not worth it, because I've lost some good friends over it. What else? I mean, some of the things that I look at when I go back, it's I should have taken funding for this company so I could have exploded it faster. You don't, any company that you hear about, I don't think there's any out there that have done it without some type of funding. They need that influx of cash to really grow, and I've always bootstrapped it. So there's a certain, certain feeling of being able to do it yourself without bringing in outside funds, and that's great. But explosive growth, if you really want that explosive growth, so maybe keep an eye open for those opportunities and maybe take one up, because I think some of the things that I've done were a little bit before its time, but had I had the influx of cash, I would have done it. And the other thing I would have done is this technology we built for fraud detection was literally pretty much everybody in the marketplace that does it built it to license it. We actually built it because nothing existed back in the early 2000s, and we needed to solve our own fraud problem. So as a developer, I wrote my own. And it took, I think, 11 years before we decided it was valuable enough to license it out. License it out sooner. That would have been a good, because it is a very hot space for us. From the business aspect, keep your eye out open for EOS when it's right time to implement. I think we would have done some bigger things with a management style.
I see.
Versus just winging it the way we don't typically do things. Those are probably the big pieces of. Like I said, I had a cousin of mine start a company and asked me a lot of advice. One of the first pieces of advice: don't hire friends. And he's like, "Oh, no, my friends are different."
Right. Yes.
Yeah. 7 years later, hey, Rich, you were right.
Oh, darn.
So luckily, him and his friend, they were able to separate in a situation that was reasonable, but it wasn't the same.
I see.
Nothing's ever the same after that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Rich, thanks so much. You shared just absolutely valuable information. We're going to have all of this on our website. We'll have your detailed bio, and your website is anura.io, so that's ANURA.io. What's the best way for people to reach out to you if they want to say hi or if they're interested in your business?
Probably email is probably the easiest, rich@anura.io. I'm easy to get. I'm on LinkedIn. Whatever you find easiest, pick up the phone, call me. I still answer the old school phone.
Awesome.